Okay, thanks for the introduction. I'm Markus, and I'm gonna present today our study of security threats in the NPM ecosystem. And this was a collaboration at TU Darmstadt with Christian Alexandra Stachsu and Michael Pradl, and also Cam Tenney from R2C, security startup for NPM security. And first, I want to quickly go to why we actually use JavaScript or study JavaScript. And the reason is it's a really popular language. Like in a survey of Stack Overflow, it's actually the most popular one. And it moved from being a browser-only language to a pretty much general-purpose language. And that's thanks to NPM and Node.js. And NPM is the package manager or the major package manager for Node.js. And it grew really large over time. And at the time of our study, it had nearly 700,000 packages, which makes it the biggest package manager from all languages out there. And this popularity also comes to a downside, as it has, at the time, 609 security advisories, and which are disclosed security vulnerabilities. And there are also pretty much attacks on NPM ecosystem. For example, the eslint incident. Eslint is a very popular JavaScript linter and has around 10 million downloads. And one of the dependencies of eslint scope, the credentials of the maintainer got compromised, and the attacker used them to upload a malicious version that tried to steal access tokens for NPM. And fortunately, that attack got detected relatively fast, and NPM deleted the package version and invalidated all tokens. But the reaction was also that they recommended to use two-factor authentication for all users. And this attack and also others, like the LeftPad attack, motivated us to look more into what the actual impact could be when a package is taken over, and what also the influence of a maintainer is on the ecosystem. And also regarding security vulnerabilities, when a package has an unpatched security vulnerability, how many other packages depend on this package. And to spoil some of our key findings, I will talk about in this talk is one that on average, if you install a package, you implicitly trust 79 third-party packages and 39 maintainers, which is a surprisingly large attack surface. And some of these popular packages can influence more than 100 other packages. So these are packages that depend on these popular packages. And looking at maintainers, some of them have also an impact of hundreds of thousands of packages. So it suffices if you have like one popular maintainer account to inject malware into many other packages. And finally, up to 40% of packages depend on code with at least one publicly known vulnerability. And before I go into how we found these findings, I want to talk about some particularities of the NPM ecosystem. And one is that there's pretty much no vetting of developers, and NPM has a very open publishing model, which means that everyone can publish something. And there's also no vetting whether the code that is, for example, hosted on GitHub matches the artifacts published on NPM. And another thing that is, especially in NPM compared to other package managers like Maven in the Java ecosystem, is that there's a heavy reuse of packages. So usually a package has way more transitive dependencies than a package on Maven. And another thing is that there's the best practice of locked dependencies. So people use package log files to constrain to a specific version so that you get reproducible builds. but the problem is that you need to manually update the package version to get patches for security vulnerabilities. And some security threats that lead out of these particularities are that due to the open publishing model, we can have lots of malicious packages and also package account takeover because there's no vetting. And another security threat is maintainer collusion, where I take like the most popular or influential maintainers, and if they work together, they can overtake most of the ecosystem, or a hacker could like get credentials of the most popular maintainers. And due to the locked dependencies model, we could exploit unmaintained legacy code because it might still contain security vulnerabilities. And basically what we did was an empirical study where we downloaded like all the package metadata, which contains dependencies and maintainers, and also downloaded the code and stored it in a database, and then calculated some novel metrics suitable for large-scale ecosystems. And in the paper, all these metrics are explained in detail, but for this talk, I just introduced the ones in the gray bubbles. One is package reach, which is basically the set of packages that have a direct or transitive dependency on a package. And we can calculate that same metric for maintainers too, which is basically from a maintainer all the packages, combining the reach of all the packages, which leads to the maintainer reach. And for vulnerable code, packages with vulnerable code, we can then also calculate the reach. And looking at the experimental setup, our observation period was from November 2010, where the data started, to April 2018, and it consisted of 670,000 packages, over 5 million versions that we looked at, nearly 200,000 maintainers, and 609 security advisories. And now I want to go into the results. The first is the evolution of dependencies in the NPM ecosystem, to see a bit also how the ecosystem grew over time. And here we can see on the x-axis the timeline, and on the y-axis the average dependencies in a log scale. And we can see that the direct dependencies are slowly going up, but compared to the transitive dependencies, which grow much faster, which kind of shows that people on NPM are using more and more dependencies, and it's just like kind of if your dependency gets more dependencies, it's just getting way worse. And so overall, the key takeaway of this graph is that a user implicitly trusts 79 other packages due to these transitive dependencies. And now looking at the evolution of package reach, we can see on the x-axis the packages ranked by their reach, and this line shows 2015, and the y-axis is the package reach. And basically we can see that there are some packages with a huge reach, like 10,000, but actually few packages that have more than 10. And looking at the next years, we can see that the problem starts to get worse over time, with in 2018 now like most of the packages having more than 10 package reach, and lots of packages that have more than 100,000 reach. And yeah, the takeaway here is that some of these popular packages can reach so many packages that they are prime target for attacks. And looking at maintainer influence, And we define a maintainer as someone that can publish a new package version on NPM. So not only contributors, but the interesting thing is people that can like upload new versions. And here we can see the maintainers sorted by their package count. And here the package count is again a log scale. And you can see that there's lots of maintainers having over like hundreds of packages. And this graph kind of shows that there's sort of a power law where there's small amount of maintainers that have a large amount of packages and control a lot of packages. And looking at this kind of threat of maintainer collusion, this graph shows the number of maintainers ordered by highest reach and the percentage of packages they reach. And so not all packages have dependencies. There are around 420,000 packages that have dependencies. So like that's the amount of packages you can technically reach, and which is like I think about 62%. And this graph shows that you actually only need around 100 maintainers to reach 50% of the whole ecosystem. So, and yeah, basically you only need 22.2% to reach all packages with dependence. So this shows that in this maintainer collusion threat is actually doable with just a small amount of maintainers. And finally, looking at security advisory evolution, in this graph we can see over time in the blue line the published advisories, and we can see there are lots of spikes due to many of these vulnerabilities coming from large-scale campaigns, like for example the directory traversal vulnerabilities as a research effort of Liang Gong. And in the yellow line we can see the unpatched advisories. So these are packages that in that time point have unpatched vulnerability, and we can see that it's kind of stagnating over in the last years, and this is due to some of these packages being unmaintained, and for example also typo squatting attacks where there will be never a patch for them. And looking at the reach of packages that have unpatched advisories, we can see that for a long time these packages have reached over around 40%, which is quite a lot of potential danger for these packages that depend on such a vulnerable package. And it seems like it goes down, but actually this metric is sort of retroactive, and you would see in the next years, because there's always multiple versions in the history that are affected, that the graph would not go down like this. And so the key takeaway from these graphs is that there are up to 40% of all packages can rely on code known to be vulnerable. And to look at some potential mitigations, we could raise developer awareness of these dependency risks, but by showing them some of the metrics we introduced. Like for example, if someone goes to NPM page for a package and wants to download it, it could show the package reach and or the number of packages that it trusts on transitively, so that the developer can decide if he wants to take that danger of all these dependencies. Another thing is to warn about vulnerable packages, and NPM already did this by introducing a sort of audit tool that shows for all installed packages the vulnerabilities, but this kind of still not prevent unknown vulnerabilities or malware. So here automatic tooling would be nice, and another idea is to vet code or maintainers, and we kind of evaluated how effective code vetting could be as a mitigation. And so we did this by like building a strategy on the metric of implicitly trusted maintainers and packages. So it's the inverse of package reach, all the packages a package depend on. And if we add like the most popular maintainer or most influential maintainers and packages, and like for each maintainer the metric goes down, and it shows that you only need like around 1,000 like of the most influential maintainers or packages to reduce the the implicitly trusted metric by a lot. And but this comes with a huge cost of actually vetting all this code. And this graph shows how much code you would need to vet, and at 1,000 packages we are around of over 200,000 code lines. So, but the takeaway here is that just vetting the most 1,500 dependent on packages would reduce the implicitly trusted packages by a factor of 10. So to conclude, just the key findings again: on average, packages implicitly trust 79 third-party packages and 39 maintainers, and some of these popular packages influence more than 100,000 other packages, and the same can be said about maintainers that can also have a huge impact on so many packages. And finally, there are up to 40% of all packages that depend on code with at least one publicly known vulnerability. And that's all I have. Thanks for listening, and I'm up for some questions.
Vinny Monaco, Naval Postgraduate School. Very interesting talk, thank you. In one of the earlier graphs, you showed the transitive dependencies, and then around 2016 it dipped, and then towards the end, the later graph where you showed
so this one?
Yeah, exactly. And then you showed the other graph that kind of peaked around 2016. So what happened?
So you mean like the plateauing at 2016?
Yeah.
So we believe this has something to do with this LeftPad incident, where basically one developer took down all his packages, which led to many like packages breaking. And we assume that since then there's more awareness for dependencies, and that's why people didn't want to take so many dependencies anymore. But we didn't, in the data, we didn't saw that much proof for that, but it's an assumption.
Interesting. Thank you.
Lily Gray, Rice University. So how do your findings apply to other software ecosystems? For instance, the Python or the Ruby package repositories. Are there comparable issues, or are the ecosystems too different for the findings to apply?
So we didn't evaluate it on Python, but from my experience, Python has a similar open publishing model and should have similar issues. Yeah, there are some papers that do compare these package ecosystems and yeah, see comparable results.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Connor Gilson from UC Berkeley. Really great talk. Thanks for the research. I'm wondering, what is a reasonable number of dependencies, right? So like as we write code, we can't do everything in-house and we need to use some dependencies. Relying on 40 other developers we don't know without auditing the code seems egregiously higher than a lot of people would expect. But what is a recommended number, or is there any research you're aware of that can help us understand that? And do you have any suggestions on how the community can better vet the code that we are using as third-party libraries?
So yeah, that's a really good question, how many dependencies. is a good number. Yeah, it really depends on how large these dependencies are. But like, if it's a lot of code, there's a lot of the attack surface, obviously. But with small dependencies, you have like a lot of, like some people using lots of micro packages, for example, and you basically just split the danger to many maintainers. So, but I think like you should be aware if you put a dependency that you need to look into this dependency and vet it yourself. And for like better strategies of vetting, we should like strive to get automatic tooling that can scan these dependencies for code or for security issues. And I think there are lots of startups that are in that space.
Cool. Thanks again.
All right, this concludes our session. Thank you very much to all the speakers, in particular the last one.